I'm doing a Las Vegas thing here because it's like smoke and mirrors. So I'm trying to kind of recreate what it's like to be out painting on location. But really, what I've done is, and I'll show you, is I started this painting. It's not finished, so I'll finish it in front of you. But I have some images of what I did to start it, so you kind of see the process. And then I'll be looking at an image, which is not really what I do when you're out painting in plein air, obviously. So just kind of pretend like you hear birds chirping, Lily. Chirp, chirp. You think there were going to be some hawks calling. Okay. Yeah. So. There you go. I should have encouraged them. So pretend like you're in downtown Las Vegas.
You don't have to.
Yeah, and then you hear a whole lot of other things, because when I'm in Vegas, I'm painting urbanscapes, and you saw some of those flash across, and you hear lots of other very interesting things when you're doing that. Usually it's things like, so I'll just say, if you're going to be a plein air painter, you have to be used to audience participation. Lots of it. Usually people come up and say, I don't see the numbers there, meaning like, hoi hoi, you're doing a paint by number painting. You hear the same things over and over, or my grandmother used to paint and all this stuff. Or usually you're standing there painting this scene and they're like, what are you painting? Right there. So it's kind of interesting, but the other most common thing I hear is, you're just like that guy on PBS with the big fuzzy So I think one day I'll have to get a Bob Ross wig and wear it out there. And then when you're out in nature, which I do also, and I just got back from participating in a big event they had in Zion last, a week ago. So I represented Las Vegas. Actually, I think I was the only Nevada artist, so I represented Nevada there. It's a different kind of challenge, because you're out dealing with a lot of elements. So you're getting up, so I'll just say, plein air painting's not for the faint of heart. You get up before light, and you get out there, and you schlep your stuff out there, and you're setting up in the dark, and it's cold or windy, or, all these things that are going on. So half the battle is just, having your, so the whole idea of plein air painting is that you're trying to capture the light effect at a particular time of day, particular time of year, particular type of, time of the season, whether it's painting on the sidewalks of Las Vegas, or if you're out in nature. So this is actually probably looks a little more detailed than I normally paint, and I'm going to rough it up a bit because I don't like it to be real tidy. So I'm really trying to paint the feeling of that scene versus a photographic reproduction. I need to get over here now. Sorry, I'm not good at standing still. That's why I plein air paint. So, and you have to stand a lot too. That's the other thing you have to do. So I try to replicate what I typically wear when I'm out there, unless it's really cold, and then I have lots of bundles of layers. And usually you need to have a hat on and a lot of sunscreen. And if you can, have an umbrella, but I'm finding in Nevada climate that's a little tough because it's windy too many days. So then you have a sail going on there. But so I'm really trying to capture the feeling of that place and the light effect. So is it afternoon light? Is it a gray day? Is it a sunny day? Is it early morning? I'm not a photorealist painter. It's just not my thing. So I would say I'm really a colorist, expressionist, and sometimes more expressionist than other times. And so colorist really is taking the color effect that you see and probably pushing it a bit. Maybe, I don't know, you'll see the image here. I don't think I've actually pushed this that much. I think that image looked pretty, this is actually downtown Las Vegas. And I think it's actually fairly close to that feeling of those colors. So I'm exaggerating it a bit, but not really completely intentionally. I'm kind of seeing it that way. I'm probably just have re-educated my eyesight a bit to do that. So a lot of what I try to do is create a color vibration. So sort of a visual vibration of colors interacting with each other. So, and there's lots of different theories about that. There's the concept of broken color, where you're really putting a yellow next to a blue, and so when the person sees it, it actually mixes to make green. I'm not doing that, but I'm just kind of putting the juxtaposition of certain colors. I use a lot of complementary colors. So, you know, for those of you that aren't used to using a lot of color, but maybe you know that a lot of you know that, you know, the complementary color of red is what? Green. Yeah. So this scene has basically kind of variations of two complementary colors, and I do that a lot. I actually kind of look for scenes that are already like that. So as you'll see the photograph, that those colors were there. I'm pushing it a bit, but the complementary colors are actually there, and that's one of the things I love about Vegas urbanscapes is there's great colors. The old stuff, you know what I mean? And it can be a white building, but it's not really white, right? And at certain times of day, the color of the sky here, you get a white building that has, like, you know, on one side it's a blue, and the other side it's a lavender, and all kinds of cool colors. So a lot of times those complementary colors are just there. So I like to paint a lot with pure color. I find that really intoxicating. And I like to paint with a lot of paint. So like you said, how did you say, what was your name of your book going to be?
Just painting.
So yeah, I say for what I do, it's all about the paint. So I lay down a lot of paint that's sort of like thick cake frosting. But that's what I like to do, and everybody's a little, you know, different about that. So I've laid out some paint here that's not very much paint for me. Somebody else would come along and go, oh my God, that's like a ton of paint. But this is, I'll go through way more than this when I'm painting one painting. So I use a lot of paint because for me that's what I like, the texturalness of paint. I also use I use a pretty limited palette, they call it. So limited palette really means a small number of colors, especially when you're doing plein air painting, whether you're using pastels, watercolors, oils, what else, acrylics. You can't really take a ton of stuff out in the field. You know, and I actually have a little rig that fits all in a backpack that if I wanted to really get, you know, further afield, I have everything in a backpack. So you kind of got to get used to using a limited palette. So like 5 or 6 colors, and you can mix a lot of colors from those 5 or 6, and I already started mixing them, but I'll hold up my palette. And, you know, you get used to it, it's amazing what you can get. I mean, basically, those were the colors. A white, a cool yellow, a warm yellow, an orange, a red, a cool red, and and that's the other thing. When you're a plein air painter, you have to be really used to being messy a lot, as you can tell. So, a warm blue and a cool blue. And that's not a lot of paint colors, and I don't think any of my paintings suffer from lack of color. So, you know, so you can actually get a lot of interesting colors from a limited palette. And some teachers will ask you to even go even more limited than that, you know, like 3 colors. So it's kind of, I think it actually, and I'm sure Roberto probably talks about that in his classes, I mean, it's kind of a good discipline to try to, for a while, limit yourself with your colors and force yourself to really learn color mixing. You learn a lot more than if you're just squirting them. You have 50 tubes of different colors and you're squirting them out of a tube. But when you're out plein air painting, it's by necessity that you've got to limit your colors. So then, you know, I really try to focus, and he talks about it in his article here, and I'll show you kind of how I start. The key, the tricky part about plein air painting is you've got to be quick. And you're capturing, honestly, you really can only spend about 2 hours on a painting before the light completely changes. If you're lucky, you get about 2 hours. So people are like, man, you're like so fast, but you know, plein air painting gets you to do that. And that's all I'm trying to do actually, is capture that light effect. You know, I'm not trying to get every little detail. And you'll see that I paint a lot with a palette knife, so you don't get a lot of detail. You know, I do use brushes, but I mean, really, I'm laying it down pretty fast with different sizes of palette knives and big brushes. And I rarely use a small brush. You don't have time, because by the time you're noodling around like that, it's like, you know, it's a whole different scene. The light's completely changed. So what some people do, and I'm never usually as disciplined as doing this, is actually if you're on a day, it's not too bad in Nevada because you tend to, it's either going to be a cloudy day all day or a bright sunny day, which is the norm all day. So you're not usually having big changes, but some people, and Monet was a master at this, would set up two different easels or have two different panels, sunny day panel and a cloudy day panel. And as soon as it changes, you shouldn't be changed. And this is the hardest thing to stop from doing. You can't change the light you can't chase the light effect. Like you're painting, and like this is twilight, so that's a little easier because it's not going to change. Well, it changes quickly to just a whole different thing, but it's not going to go from cloudy to sunny to sunny. So, you know, Monet would do that. That's how he painted some of his. You've seen pictures of him painting with like 3 or 4 big canvases out there, and he just all of a sudden switched to the other panel or the other canvas because the light totally changed. And you got to do that or just stop and come back another day. The way you ruin a painting pretty quickly is going, oh, okay, now I'll make it a cloudy day. Or if you can, you try to remember what it looked like when you started. And if it was you started it because it was a gray day painting and you love that subtle effect, and then all of a sudden it brightens up, you got to just almost not look at the scene anymore and just keep painting how you remember it. Couple other little tips here. You have to be extremely flexible to be a plein air painter because a lot of what's going to happen out there. I mean, your stuff flies in the dirt. I mean, everything. So you just got to or the scene totally changes, or you're painting something and a car pulls up and blocks what you're painting, or whatever it might be. Or someone really obnoxious is hounding you, or various things like that. So you've got to just be able to go with the flow. I mean, this guy talks about, number one, be properly equipped. Consider how the light will change. I'm not real great at that. Some are better at going, okay, the sun's over here, so by 2 hours from now, it's going to be over here. I'm usually just paint this scene, I'm a very emotional painter. This scene grabs me, and I stop and I do it. And you can spend way too much time driving around trying to figure out, and by that time, the whole scene's changed. So I just paint what grabs me, and if it totally changes by the time I would have figured that out, I have half the painting done, and I move on to the next place. So being properly equipped is key. He has that as number one, considering how the light will change. Here's a key thing. Squint to simplify relationships. So plein air painting, as I said, it usually is not about painting the details. So one of the tricks I tell you is when you're out there looking at your scene, like even if I looked at you guys, squint and make all the details go away. So you just get like the big shapes and the big impressions and the colors, It's kind of hard to do on a group of people. Yeah, but it's amazing how that works. So when I started thinking about that, I'm very nearsighted. I wear contacts, so I realized I just wear my glasses. I get all set up, take my glasses off, and hopefully remember where I put them. And then I paint, and it's like, wow, the fact that I'm blind as a bat actually helps me as a plein air painter. It's great. So it really actually does work because you get rid of, you don't fool, you just see it like, you look at it like it's an impressionist painting right there. A couple other things. You really got to focus on laying down first the big shapes. And actually, some of the best paintings, like if you're interested in doing this, you want to do probably your first couple hundred paintings only doing the big shapes. Like, don't even worry about, I have some smaller shapes in here, but you'll see when I sketched it out, it was pretty much the big shapes, and there's mostly bigger shapes in here, but I'm breaking it up a little bit. Focus on the big shapes, draw those in, and then lay them in with your color, and then you can start modifying within the shape temperature changes. So within this, you'll see I'll do a little bit of like a cooler or a warmer of that lavender to give the variation, but not like noodling with the detail at the beginning. This person says, paint what you see, don't mess with Mother Nature. That's true, except that you should actually you can recompose it, you know. So, like you'll see when you see this picture, there was a big kind of triangular pine tree in the picture that I didn't put in there because it would take away too much, you know, it's like it would stick up too much in this light space and be distracting, you know, and I really wanted, what this picture is going to be about, you'll see when you see what the painting is going to be about, you'll see when you see the picture. So you should edit and you should recompose as much as you can. It's a little bit hard. I find that a little easier on urbanscapes than when you're purely out in nature. I don't know, it is sort of like Mother Nature's going. So it's a little bit of a psychological thing that's interesting. What I try to do when I go out is have my colors already on my palette. So I'm pretty ready to go. When I open up my stuff, it's pretty ready to go. If I'm really smart, and I don't always do this, I'll look at the scene, I'll draw out the scene, you'll see the drawing, and I'll do that very quickly. And then I will, the best way to do it is go ahead and pre-mix your colors. And if you can do that, it's really great. I don't always do it because I'm usually like, you know, antsy to like, oh, I just want to play. But, you know, if you can pre-mix your colors, so you're looking at the scene and you're getting it all laid out, that gives you a really good color harmony because you can see them all there and go, wow, okay, does that represent, you know, what I'm looking at? And then once you start painting, man, it goes fast because you have your piles of pre-mixed colors ready to go. So if you could do that, that's a great way to do it. You know, when I'm driving around or walking around, I'm looking for a scene. I have my handy-dandy viewfinder. And you really need this when you're plein air painting. Well, I guess that's probably the only time you need it. But because I guess you're not using it in the studio. And I do studio painting also. But what this does is, so if I see an area, I'm like, yeah, I kind of like this neighborhood or this thing. I stop. Before I set up, I walk around, spend a little time walking around, and I'm looking to see, and I make the shape of my canvases. I do different colors. Sometimes I do little skinny canvases like that. Or big skinny canvases. I don't know if anybody's seen those in here, but I do a lot of those. Some of those paintings were like that. Whatever the size of your canvas is, and you're looking at that, and this really helps you compose and isolate what you're trying to paint. Because one of the hardest things you're doing when you're plein air painting is focusing. There's so much going on out there. And you're trying to focus in on what is this painting really going to look like. And the bigger place in nature that you are, like I just got back from Zion, the harder that is. Because it's so grandiose. You know, you do the Grand Canyon. You can't paint the Grand Canyon. I mean, that's, you know, and, you know, so to focus in on, well, what part of it am I going to paint? This helps a ton, and it helps you compose. So I walk around, figure it out, okay, boom, this is where I'm going to set up, get it set up as quickly as possible, and like make sure that, because when you're plein air painting, you're stepping back a lot from your painting, so you got to make sure that, there was one other artist up at Zion that actually built he had a big plywood platform on the top of his truck, and he stands up there and paints. I'm like, I would kill myself. I mean, that's just, but he's a rock climber. So, you know, I'm just saying, oh, that is insane, you know. So, yeah, anyway, so that's the deal. So, let me show you how you lay in the basic, do the basic drawing. So, you're just doing the drawing as quickly as possible, and, you know, so I just lay it out. I'm not real fussy about the drawing. And it's not all perfectly measured or anything like that. Your little viewfinder helps you. And then I started, before I stopped, I forgot to take a picture purely at the drawing stage. So on the left, I'm starting to mask in a little bit of the dark shapes. So go ahead. So now this is where I then did I took a kind of a wash to lay in, this is the value study. So from the drawing, I did my values. So I took one color, it's kind of a reddish, alizarin kind of color, and I did the darks, mediums, and lights. And that just helps me also see, so it's almost like a black and white, to kind of see, do I have the values about right? Because that'll make a, that'll really make a difference in your painting. And then just show the one other is the scene. So that's the scene, which you can't totally see. It's really dark. I don't know. Is there a way to lighten it? Probably not. Because it's kind of washing out the, which is one of the problems about painting from a photograph. Like you can see it better when you're looking on the computer. It's just not, showing it as well up here. Because when you take a photograph like that, it's making all the shadow part really dark. And when you're standing there live, you can see into those shadows. So that's one of the challenges. But, so then you've got to figure out, and if I do paint from a photograph, I'll use a computer and try to fool with the image enough that I can see a little bit better into the image. So what I'm doing next is, there were some really neat, I think you'll have to help me there. I think this sign is like a yellow. It's like a neon yellow, isn't it? So what's not really happening here, because I already painted this weekend, it's already set up a little bit. So when I'm usually painting when I am painting in plein air, you're painting wet into wet. So this, I'm kind of cheating a little bit. This is a little bit easier than when you're painting in plein air. So because I've already got the darks in there, and I think you've got this. There's a little light sign. That's what grabbed me, was the colors, color palette, which always gets to me, and then just there were some neat lights up here going on into the shadows. And so I'm just using a little bit of this, my palette knife, to kind of get that impression. I don't know if everybody can see what I'm doing. I think up here, I'm thinking the windows, there's like a light. And these were kind of this color, is that right? I don't know if anybody can see the actual image. And I'm not going to worry about having this all really tidy, because I like my paintings to be loose. And so it's okay if I don't want it to look like it was like paint by number. So when people come and see me on the street, they say that, I'm like, oh my gosh, I got to really make it messy. Mess it up. Go ahead and ask me any questions as I paint. I'm used to that. Well, what I did, this one I sketched with just watered down paint. In here, usually out in the field, I'm using oils. In here, I'm using, so the base of this is oil. In here, I'm actually using water-based oils. I don't know if anybody else has painted those. Anybody's done that? Yeah. And just because, no mess. I mean, it's a lot easier, less toxic, and all that kind of thing. Some of the purists are horrified about that. Whatever. But they were a lot easier to clean up, and then sometimes I'll sketch with just sometimes I'll actually take, it depends on how much stuff and where I'm at and how much stuff I want to schlep. Sometimes I'll actually do my base lay-in with acrylic. And that's actually kind of helps, is a little cheating way to help me get it in there pretty quickly. And then I can go in and lay the thick oil stuff over it, and not have to. It's a little easier.
You ever set up a grid?
Yeah. So when I'm painting, when I do the drawing, is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it depends on how complicated the scene is, but I'll do at least cut the panel into a middle and like fours, and then use that as my grid for drawing. If it's more complicated, a more complicated scene, I may cut it into more than that. But I'm not making it super accurate ever. But you got to have it basically right, or else people will wonder what the heck it is. I think the other thing is my paintings will tend to be sort of like 50-foot paint jobs. Like people will go, wow, from back here I can tell what it is. Now this isn't so much. Some of my other paintings are more like that, and you know, so that's why what I mean is they're pretty chunky, and so they look more like a lot of chunky shapes and things than when they're up front, up close. And that, you know, everybody has their different preferences on that.
Do you kind of have a size canvas that you limit yourself to?
No, well, that's a good question. When you're out plein air painting, I use pretty big, but a lot of people think that's crazy. So it kind of depends on what your situation's going to be. And I would say when if you're starting new at it, you want to keep it small. Do like 8 by 10 initially. Do a lot of those till you get really comfortable with it, because a big canvas can be a little overwhelming. I'm trying not to be in everybody's way here. But the other big challenge you have when you're doing plein air painting is transporting your very wet painting back. And if you're an acrylic painter, that's a lot easier. Or watercolor. So keep that in mind. But
Yeah, but watercolor, some people complain about the dry air and the wind and
yeah.
their paintings.
Does anybody in here do watercolor plein air? Does anybody do that? How do you solve that? It's a challenge. You have to be really
Just take a spritzer with me.
Yeah. Does it work okay?
Water spray, yeah. And also with watercolor, you want to control the size of the board a little bit more too. I didn't have a problem with that.
You haven't? Okay. Any
I
other?
did it in the car with the air conditioner.
You what? Yeah, I have painted. I'll be honest. I have painted in the car on really bad days. Yeah, it's not the ideal, but
Well, the one I lost by the lower edge, it didn't look like the fan. From the humidity in the air, it started to rain. I could get it back.
That's a part.
yeah, there's a lot of, you can have a lot of, well, you guys know you've done it. There's a lot of crazy things that happen when you're out there. So you have to have a pretty high tolerance level, especially when you start. My husband's in the audience. He can tell you that the first time I went out plein air, I called him and I'm crying. I'm like, I can't do this. It's like a nightmare. Because I didn't have the right stuff and, you know, had no idea.
It is all about the gear.
Yeah, it's all about the gear. And so, you know, it's a challenge, and I'd say, I don't know if you guys have done it, you'd say you got to get through probably the first 6 months of feeling very frustrated.
Yeah.
That sounds really encouraging, doesn't it? Why would I do that?
How do you discipline yourself to only take what you need?
That's
without
hard.
Filling your truck all the way up with everything.
You know what happens? It's like going on a trip. If you do it a few times of being out there with a bunch of stuff, you're going to just be so mad at yourself that you'll cure yourself pretty quickly. Don't you think?
Not yet.
Not yet?
I'm always afraid I'll forget something.
Well, yeah, I mean, I have it in my car. I have extra stuff in my car, and it's hard, and if anybody's seen my car, you see that there's paint all over my car. So you don't want to buy a car that you care a lot about. Because there's no way. Well, I guess if you're acrylic or watercolors, maybe you can sort of avoid it. But when you're transporting these oil paints, forget it. You know, I mean, the wet paintings. So it's just the nature of the beast. But I think pretty quickly you'll get to the point where you pare down.
Hey, at least I got her set up in a studio outside of the house. Now there's not oil paint all over the house. Doorknobs, rubber handles.
Yeah, so I'm mostly right now just using the palette knife just because we're a little short on time here. I think it'll just be easier. And you can see how I'm getting it a little bit more chunky and less what? Yeah, less smooth. It's just sort of my thing that I like to do. And but the other big thing, honestly, about this scene, which I don't know if you noticed that when we started, is that what probably really drew me the most was the sign. So, and now I can't remember what it looked like.
Well, have him put it on a computer, look at it. Have him turn his laptop around.
Can you put it on just the screen and then people?
Not the drawing, the actual photograph. The actual photograph.
He's like
Not the
kidding.
drawing, the photograph.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got it.
Yeah.
I can't see.
Just pull it up on your laptop screen. There you go. Isn't it? It's like it says motel. Oh yeah, and then that's what I love is that sign. And like when you guys look at this, oh I forgot. An important ingredient is before I start my painting, I name it. And that's just because I want to get that idea of the scene. There was something about that scene that grabbed me to begin with. So, I try to name it so that I stay kind of mentally true to the idea. Does that make sense? And so I'm going to just do that sign real quick. I'm going to get a little bit. There are these bushes here of I don't know if they're roses or something that are going on there that are interesting. Let me try to think. Any other tips? What other questions do people have?
What's the best time of the day to paint?
Well, I'm really partial to early morning or twilight. Late, well, it doesn't have to be twilight, into twilight. I love doing nocturnes too. So early morning, early morning. The middle of the day is the worst because there's no shadows.
So I mean early morning, like before sunrise?
Well, if you can, that's great. But even up until like about 10, and then so I'm using a big brush, and then after like 3. Well, it depends on the time of year, but generally speaking, because you want to get. I like high contrast, so those are the times of day where you get the high contrast, and that's. But I'm not a subtle painter, so obviously, so I think a subtle painter would probably pick a different time, but they probably wouldn't. They wouldn't want the high contrast time of day, and they would. They like probably the cloudy days, which means it'd be kind of hard to be a subtle painter living in Las Vegas. So, there are some of these flowers on these bushes, and you just see I just do them. I'm just suggesting them here with the palette knife. Not everybody's comfortable using a palette knife, so again, it's sort of like what, you have to think about what you like.
Tell them about the Hitchy method with the cubes and cylinders.
So a lot of this comes from a guy named Henry Henchy. I don't know if anybody else is familiar with him. So he was in Provincetown, and he would have students. You had to paint for a couple of years. First year, I think, was totally. So there's some neon green underneath here that I'm liking, and on these two guys real quick, and then I'll do the sign. Just kind of something else going on there. Orange. your first year, you had to paint only with a big trowel. And then you could graduate to a big palette knife, probably like this other one that I had. He wanted people to focus on the, the big masses and not the details.
Values.
And the values and the colors and the color shapes. And then you spent at least a year on paintings of colored blocks that were sitting outside. And that really taught you, so like a red block, and what does one side look like in the shadow and in light, and versus the other side, versus a blue block on the same, And so got people to really, it was actually from Monet, it was how to paint the light effect. So a lot of this comes from him, and he got it from Monet, and so it's kind of not that new, is it? But it's interesting, and there's still a lot of devotees of him that studied with him, especially back east and in Annapolis, which is near where I live. There's a whole group of people that are like fanatical about his method and only paint like that. And, you probably has anybody else here heard of that? So, yeah. So it's pretty fascinating, and they even do figures out in the sunlight. It's all everything's outside, and they do figures outside using the same method. And yeah, there's a whole concept of how you do that, which is pretty fascinating. And okay, so I'm not gonna finish this whole thing. I'm gonna run out of time, but I'm going to do a little bit on the sign. So the sign actually has I think the other thing that's not in here that I actually would put in here, I don't know if you guys saw this crazy tree. Just turn the camera. See that tree sticks? Now, unless you were trying to do something a little suggestive, it just sort of sticks out like a sore thumb. So I didn't put that in there. But what I will put in, see the lights? I'll put those in. Now, what I'm not going to like about that is this is already somewhat dry. Those lights will look a lot better if I was painting wet into wet, because they would be fuzzy. I don't want them to have hard edges. So I'll put them in. I probably won't put them in tonight. I'll go back and I'll put liquid over this to make this a little more like wet again, or I might even actually put paint over it, and then put those guys in with a real soft brush. But if I was doing it purely the way it was, if I was doing this live, I'd probably be putting them in with a more of a palette knife than I'll do now. But the sign is interesting because it has like it's actually pink on the inside, and then the white, kind of neon. And then what to me really makes it pop out is that the downtowner is in that turquoise. So I'll just do a couple more minutes here. So I think there's actually a little bit more red, warm red on this sign than, so I let that under part dry a little bit, and I'll just scrape over a little bit of warm red on there. So that way that's sort of how the sign looks to me, because it's probably kind of rusted. So it's not a straight, pure red. It's like the darker, cooler red underneath, and then the warmer red on top. So that's where a palette knife comes in kind of handy. You see how that's already kind of making that stand out? And then I would I'd mix up a nice, I'll probably go with a pretty bright pink, because I want it to stand out against that red. So there's the inside, and I actually do have, and I forgot to bring them, you can buy, and I bought them specifically for Las Vegas, the urban paintings. You can buy a few neon colored water miscible oils in neon colors. And you kind of, as much as I said at the very beginning, you can mix almost every color. kind of hard to mix neons. I don't know if anybody's run into that same challenge. So I bought those, and I use them sparingly just to add that little punch. So like that downtowner part that's in the turquoise, I'll probably. So I'm just, and you can see I'm not trying to make this real like it's like I'm a sign painter.
Give you some mall stick?
In a blue moon, I do. But I'm just, again, it's sort of like just, I kind of like it fairly loose, and just the impression, and then I'll let that set up, and I would like, what does he say? Apartments, yeah. You guys probably read about these, they're the ones having all the controversy about the noise down there. The people that live at the downtown. So what'll happen here is you go back in and I have a little, I've made sort of a neon white here, yellow white, and I go back. It needs to be a little thicker to make it a little pop, because the wetter the paint is, the thicker your paint needs to be to make that inside part pop. So I would just do that as quickly as possible, and I won't do them all, but you kind of get the idea. And then the turquoise will be a little bit hard to make as turquoise as it really is. Let's see if I can do it. The downtown. But I have a turquoise blue that's probably a little bit brighter. Kind of gives you the idea. And I actually, a lot of times when I'm doing lettering, I don't even do all the letters, because you don't really want it to look like it's a stencil. All right, any questions? We kind of gave you the quick view here of plein air painting. It's more, when you look at this, actually this blue is almost just the color swatch, not the actual what it says. I gave you plein air painting in a nutshell. Any questions? Feel free to come up and ask me.
Can you mix the water oils with the regular oil?
You can. Yes. Yeah.
Is it true that water soluble oils are very slippery?
You know, different brands have different.
Which brand?
Well, everybody, you go online. I was just reading some stuff about a week ago online, because I'm actually thinking about switching to water mixable oils in my studio. And I'm like, yeah. So I was looking at what everybody thinks. My favorite ones were Van Gogh's, which they don't make anymore. But they have a different version. Talons is really the company that makes them. I liked Van Gogh's because they were really buttery. And that's what some of these are. They're really buttery and not so slippery, and really easy to mix, and they were cheap. And now you can't get them. But you can, sometimes I think you can find the Talons version. Now, there's other ones that are like the Artisans. I don't know if anybody's used those. Those can be really hard to even squeeze out of the tube. So other people swear by the, there's some Lucas Berlin ones that are pretty good. You can get from Jerry's, and let me think what else. There's another. Yeah, Holbein Duos. I think those are pretty good. Those are more expensive, but yeah. Some of them do tend to have more of a, kind of a high, they drive with a high sheen, which is okay sometimes, depending on what you're trying to achieve. So, yes?
I saw your work on Zion, which was wonderful, by the way.
Oh.
And I'm wondering how you derive the colors. The work that she did was
really over the top in terms of the color.
Color.
And Zion is like that, but, I mean, you've really pushed it. So when you look at these wonderful colors,
Yeah.
how do you decide what to push and how to do it? Or does it?
That's a good question. Probably, so one of the tenets that you should think about, and I don't always achieve, is try not to make everything in the painting super high color. Have some quiet areas. Same thing with my brush work. Like some of this is going to just stay smooth and some of it's more chunky, because if it's all chunky, you need to have sort of like one main character. So you try to find one color pop or a few color pops and chunkiness and kind of active brush work. It's so when I'm in Zion, I think, did you see other people's work?
I saw the show at the museum.
Okay, so it's more most people's are more natural colors.
Definitely stepped out.
Yeah, I kind of see those colors. I don't know, maybe I have a visual impairment, but I think a lot of it's that henching thing. If you start looking at it, and so one of the things like they talk about is, blue sky is really almost never a blue sky, or like a blue box. I talked about those color blocks. A blue block in sunlight, the top is not blue. It's usually like a light orange or a pink or whatever. So you start seeing things after you really dive into learning more about that. You do start seeing those things a little bit differently. And then I also felt like, honestly, painting in Zion, where you're painting a very, what's the word I'm looking for, iconic place, and everybody's going to be painting a lot of those rocks and a lot of the way it really looks. I don't purposely try to paint different than that. I mean, I just sort of do, but maybe I push it a little bit more because, I know that in a show like that, everybody's paintings are just going to look like 130 paintings of the same rocks. Does that make sense? Yeah. And they're beautiful, and the paintings are beautiful, but it sort of looks like, well, let's do a little bit of different take on.
Did you see Mark Bangerter's?
Yes. So he paints, and that was interesting. So that show, and I have to tell you guys, if you have a chance next year, a couple people saw it. It's good because what they try to do is paint. They choose artists that are across the spectrum of style and technique and color and everything, and that's great. And so the guy she's talking about did very abstract paintings of, what would you call it, like Picasso type paintings of Zion.
Yeah.
Very cool.
What was his name?
Mark Bangeter. Bangeter, Bangeter, I think, Bangeter. So, you're like, wow, that's really interesting. He's not doing your straight up nature paintings, So.
If I could just get you to talk about the hinchy blocks. Anybody here can practice the hinchy blocks. You just get some scrap wood, and there's just a few colors you paint them, right?
Yeah, the primary colors.
Paint them the primary
It'll
colors.
teach you a lot about color.
Get a
Even if
square
you're-
block, and just set it in the sun, and look for the sun, get it in an angle on one side, shade one on the other, and just use a palette knife and figure it out.
These are kind of like the blocks, and then you take the block idea, and then you go out.
Buildings.
Yeah, and then it just kind of goes on. It's kind of interesting. It'll teach you a lot about color. Yeah.
Is the sky gonna stay the same?
This guy, I'll keep it. I'm probably going to warm it up just a little bit more. It was cool at the top and warmer here, and I might warm it up. I won't do too much more with the sky. Maybe not anymore. But when I put those lights in, those lamps, I'll have to paint in around those a little bit to make them fuzzy. Yeah.
If you find that you're painting in without shadows, do you prep with a complement base?
A lot of times I do. Yeah. So, and sometimes I'll just do that anyway. And so she's asking, like when I do my underpainting, if the scene looks like it's predominantly green, which doesn't happen around here, but let's think of an example. Let's see, yeah. If the scene's going to look like it's fairly neutral, then I'll try to do a complement color underneath. That's when I'll use the acrylics a lot.
Yeah.
And I'll let some of that show through. to just create that color vibration and make it pop a little bit more. Any other questions? Sorry, we couldn't do a whole painting, but it's kind of hard to do that with oils.
Will you bring this back next time?
Oh, okay, I'll do that. Yeah. I'll do that.
Do you varnish? When you use that palette knife before you market a piece, do you varnish?
Do I varnish? Yes. So everybody has their different theories about varnishing. The traditional theory is you wait for 6 months. But other people say if I did a spray varnish right now while it was wet, that's okay too. And I do that a lot of times. Then people are like, oh, it won't really be archival. And I'm like, I don't really expect anybody's going to have my paintings for 200 years. But, you know, I'm not that worried about it. But, you know, yeah. So, I mean, in here, and I think it's so dry here that, you know, it dries pretty quickly, even as chunky as I paint. Yep. Okay. And then the last piece of equipment that I didn't talk about is you need wet painting carriers to now put the painting that's very wet into some kind of, there's all different things they make. I just taped up a box and brought, you know, did this because it's an odd shaped thing. But you got to have something, and that's where a lot of artists will like be, especially when you start out, you're out there going, oh, now, how am I going to get this thing home? Pizza boxes work and all kinds of stuff. So.
FedEx box.
Yep.
I saw a carrying case the other day at that has adjustable slots.
Yes.
It slides in.
Yep. Yeah.
If you got an extra 100 bucks, they're great.
Yeah.
Doesn't the French easel do that?
Yes. Yeah, so I can actually, I'll break it down, and this thing on right here, when I break it all down, then it actually will carry the wet painting on the outside of the French easel. Yeah, so it's pretty handy.
Or if you're painting on a canvas board, those little panel carriers are nice because you can get 2 or 3 wet panels. in
Like
one
what you were
little
talking
suitcase
about,
thing.
those things. In any event, you'll still get paint on your car. So if you're somebody who's really obsessive compulsive, plein air painting is probably not the thing for you. So thanks for coming, everybody.